black storm coming. See the lightning strike. Black people rising.
I'm Soledad O'Brien. Welcome to Matter of Fact. The history of the United States is complicated and full of contradictions, with the greatest contradiction being the institution of slavery. While the founders professed a belief in liberty, enslaved Africans worked their fields and raised their monuments, building the nation's wealth without pay and on land they couldn't lay claim to. There have been calls for compensation to those who were enslaved and now their descendants. Most recently, a California task force submitted a reparations report to the state's lawmakers, which proposes cash payments and other support like home buyers assistance and free tuition for black families. And Missouri Congresswoman Cori Bush introduced a bill for compensation from the federal government. But how do you put a price tag on more than 150 years of continued and systemic injustice? Our special correspondent Joey Chen traveled to Georgia to talk to researchers trying to do that math.
Here, where southern rivers meet the sea, is the scene of America's first broken promise to black Americans: liberty and land. Why is land so important?
It's a way that we have control of family and control of our lives.
Historian and activist Amir Jamal Touré's family traces its ties to Georgia's Sea Islands and the Carolina Lowcountry all the way back to the early 1800s.
For at least 3 generations.
They weren't alone. Some 40,000 freedmen were allocated land in one of the last acts of the Civil War.
Special Field Order Number 15, better known as 40 acres and a mule.
Not just a platitude, but a promise. On General Sherman's march to the sea, as many as 10,000 newly liberated people followed the Union forces. So they're emancipated.
Yes.
But
where do we go? Where do we go?
Under pressure and facing skepticism from Washington about his own loyalties, Sherman called black pastors to his Savannah headquarters. So what is this that we're seeing?
We're seeing the meeting.
Vonette Good Walker leads the Ralph Mark Gilbert Civil Rights Museum in Savannah, home of the only illustration of the meeting.
And this is Reverend Garrison.
He was their voice.
He was the voice. He was the spokesperson for all of them.
It was Reverend Garrison Frazier's reply to Sherman that set the stage for a groundbreaking order.
You know, what do you want? What do you want from us? And he says, we want land and we want education.
The result, Special Field Order 15 reallocated land from Charleston, South Carolina down to Jacksonville and 30 miles inland, turning the property of rice plantation Confederates over to the newly emancipated, a directive which could have changed wealth distribution for generations.
It becomes our generational wealth of being able to pass something down to our children.
Instead, it became a promise broken. Sandy Darity and Kirsten Mullen study the history of and potential for restorative justice, beginning with those 40 acres. Draw that line for me to reparations conversations today. Are they really connected?
Oh, absolutely.
The couple's books outline a clear case for the nation's debt to Black America.
One of the key goals of a true reparations project would be the elimination of the racial wealth gap. And that figure at the moment is on the low end, $14 trillion.
A mind-bending sum, but the researchers point to billions, even trillions that Washington deems worth it for corporate bank bailouts, agricultural prices, COVID relief. By their accounting, an average of $850,000 paid to each family descended from enslaved Africans might only scratch the surface of the nation's true debt. What does America as a society owe Black Americans?
Restitution.
Absolutely.
Yeah, restitution. And the capacity to be
engage.
able to participate on an equal basis in this society.
We hand out checks today. Can they accomplish that?
Well,
They can go a long
accomplish
way.
a whole lot. Yeah.
So could land. And what happened to those 40 acres for Black freedmen? Well, after Lincoln's death, his successor, Andrew Johnson, quickly rescinded the field order, reneging on the promise. If those 40 acres had stayed with those people who were supposed to get it,
we would have altered the entire dynamic of economic inequality by race in the United States.
so we wouldn't have to talk about reparations today.
Probably not.
Probably not.
That's our speculation.
Instead, the debt grew with compounded interest from generations of other inequities. Back on land that could have been part of his family's legacy, the irony isn't lost on Jamal Touré.
We're not living with the trauma of America not facing up to it. If we had lived up to it, we wouldn't have to worry about it right now. But at some point, we're going to have to face up to it.
For many on these lands and beyond, America's debt is an invoice long overdue. In Savannah, I'm Joey Chen for Matter of Fact.
Hello, and welcome to another edition of the Umoja Circle. My name is Keith Smokey Johnson, and for those of you who are new to the show, this is an African-centered talk show where I try to correct errors where errors are found and to introduce facts where we find that so many people are working on fiction when it comes to who we are as people of African descent. This is a second part of a two-part show in which I discuss this 40 Acres in a Lie. This is a podcast that I came across. I showed the clip from in show number 1, and there's another clip that I showed at the beginning of this one that I want you to understand that this is serious stuff when it talks about 40 acres and a mule. This was no hyperbole. A lot of times we talk about 40 acres and a mule. We don't really know the history behind it. I tried to show in the first show that it came about because of a tragedy that happened 20 miles north of Savannah, where General William Tecumseh Sherman and his 62,000 troops came out of their march to the sea. They started in Atlanta, and then they went into the deeper part of the South, wreaking havoc on the civilian population deliberately, because they believed this was 1864, the end of 1864, and for the first 3 years of this conflict of civil war, it got progressively worse, and even Lincoln thought there might be no end to it. Now, during that period of time, you had European powers looking at what was going on here. Even the Russians in 1861 freed their serfs. And when they freed their serfs, they gave them something like 3-acre plots with tools to maintain themselves. So it was embarrassing to us to have this thing called enslavement for 246 years, when you have Russia freeing their equivalent or their serfs of a white European, predominantly enslaved, no rights, but they gave them their freedom and a lot. So there was already examples of what you call reparations being done on the other side of the world, and here we are trying to maintain enslavement in certain parts of this country south of the Mason-Dixon line. So this was all part of what was going on. I tried to explain that more relevancy, what happened along the way on that march. There was a tragedy that happened where hundreds of black following Sherman's troops were stranded on the other side of a creek, which is 20 miles north of Savannah, Georgia, called Ebenezer Creek. There was some pontoon boats that were going across there for the troops of Sherman's troops, and the rear guard of those things, that's the image of Ebenezer Creek, as you can see how it is. This was the actual image of at that time. The general so happened to be called Jefferson Davis. He was a 14th Corps commander of Sherman's troops. Decided on his own that things were going too slow, and we got all these black folks following us. There was something like 20,000 to 30,000 blacks who were liberated themselves along that march as they was going through that region of Georgia, from Atlanta until Savannah, like something like 287 miles stretch of all plantations. And there was he considered them too slow, and he cut the pontoon bridge, stranding a large portion of those black folks, on the other side while they watched their protection march off to Savannah, 20 miles away, and they panicked because there were Confederate soldiers, cavalry, on their tail or tailing them, and they didn't want to go back to this environment of enslavement. So many of them just jumped in the water. Then women, children, old people, whatever, died, hundreds of them, and it was a disaster for the Lincoln administration when the newspaper got a hold of it, when the abolitionists got a hold, when the radical Republican Congress and senators got a hold of this. So he sent Sherman to Stanton, the Secretary of War. I showed pictures of Stanton in the previous show, and they had this meeting with Reverend Frazier and about 19 or 20 other men. So let's go on to the next one, start this. And this is the area that Frazier said that he wanted when he made his demands. He went and talked to not only the slaves that followed and made it to Savannah with enslaved people who followed and made it to Savannah with Sherman, but he talked to the people around in the area around Savannah, Georgia. And you could see, and this is what he asked for when he talked to Sherman, that we need our own land. We don't want to be around white people. We want to have our own land, okay, that we will work and we will pay off. And Lincoln and Congress recognized that, and this is the area of land that they were going to give, well, they actually gave to be a black land. The land, they're in the one of these videos that I showed, there was an investigation where through all kinds of process to show that it was at least 1,200 that they found who had land titles in that region. We talking from Charleston to Jacksonville, Florida. See, and Savannah is in between, south of Charleston. That was supposed to be our own black lands. It was already in play, and it was real. It was not. It was already. There was already federal legislation allotting that to black people for 246 years of uncompensated labor. This was no joke. I know we joke about 40 acres and a mule, but it was a real thing. And again, America, and I read in the first show when on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial in 1963, when King said in his famous speech, I Have a Dream speech, that we were offered a promissory note by the United States government, and that note came back insufficient funds. And he's talking about events like this. They owe us, he was saying, even in 1963, nearly 100 years after these events in 1865. Let's go on to the next one. This is the worth of the land, okay? They said 40,000, by June of 1865, 40,000 freed slaves had been allotted that land. 40,000 people along that 400,000 square mile stretch of land south of Charleston to Jacksonville, Florida. And this is the estimated price of that land today, okay? This was the economic potential of that 40-acre promise, okay, that was reneged on, not by Lincoln because he got assassinated a couple of months later in April of 1865. Then you had this racist vice president, okay, and we've been familiar with racist politicians who just disallowed vetoed all those things that were already promised and already in the works. And we went into what you call Jim Crow. You got the black codes, and he gave it back to the traders. This is who Sherman went on that march to. He saw that all that land, all those people that owned those lands were traders, and he made sure that the South howled. That's what the march on to the sea was all about, okay? Because they betrayed their oath. They betrayed their citizenship, these white Confederates. Let's go on to the next one. Okay, this is what happened. After Lincoln's assassination, President Johnson overturned the special field order. He stated that the confiscated land could only be held during wartime. After the war ended, the land would need to be returned to the landowner. That was BS. Okay, all Congress had to do was make those documents legal, those deeds legal, which they were prepared to do. All right, they were prepared to do that because there was more radical Republicans at that time who were part of the government. And when that field order came out in January of 1865, they were prepared to pass it. You had enough votes. You had the president's willingness to do that. I'm talking about President Lincoln, and there was no issue. It only became law because. Would become law because when Congress make it law. But they got distracted by his assassination. So he's using this BS excuse to say that it was a wartime. No. He just wanted to give it back to the same people who betrayed this government because they were white men. And he couldn't see black people with that. And that's why he did it. One of the reasons why he went and got impeached, you know, the Andrew Johnson was the first president to get impeached. This is the reason why. The radical Republicans knew that he did things that should not have been done. What he did to these black people was one of the reasons. He vetoed everything that was, all the laws that were being set and to put to his office to be signed into law, he vetoed. The paperwork, the legislative paperwork was all went through the whole process, got to his desk, and he just vetoed it. So it's not because of the wartime anything. It's because he was a white supremacist who didn't believe in, from Tennessee, an illiterate. His wife taught him how to read. Okay, white privilege, because even though he was thought out as a tailor, but he made it to the presidency. Black people didn't have that kind of rights at that time. They barely had the 13th Amendment, and the 14th Amendment was made them citizens, then the voting rights, 15th Amendment, okay, determined by white legislators again. Let's go on to the next one. Okay, but the government, I want to reinforce this point. The government did indeed give land to more than 1,200 formerly enslaved men and women, only to take the land back after their former enslavers' protest to Johnson, not to Lincoln, but to Johnson, their former owners. These were the people who fought for the Confederacy. And he accepted these white traders' rights to the people that were abused by enslavement. You wonder why we have these reparations movements today is because it would not be something that was simple. It was something that was done to us and agreed by us, okay? That's what Martin Luther King was saying, that we were given promissory notes that came back in insufficient funds. It was deliberately done. Let's go on to the next one. Let's go on to the next slide. Okay, many of the former slaves were forced into sharecropping, a form of indentured servitude. This is what happened to us instead of having, generational wealth. We were not allowed to even make wealth. You're wondering why we're always below the economic. It ain't because we're lazy. You can't be a sharecropper lazy. You can't invent all these things that black people invent. You can't have all these brilliant scientists and educators and doing all these things, and congressmen and senators for at least 12 years during the Reconstruction time in Congress, who created a public school system and could call us simple or idiotic, but that's the mythology that was passed down to hide the fact that America, the government of America, did not want us to succeed. We can't face that even to this day, right? But we had to deal with this stuff. Let's go on to the next. Yeah, you got the black codes, restricting black people's right to own property, conduct business, buy and lease land, and more freely through public spaces, move freely through public spaces. And you're wondering why we are behind economically, okay? A central element of the black codes were vagrancy laws. And these vagrancy laws, if you can't find a job, you have white folks telling you, we don't have anything for you, so you're out in the street, where you get picked up for vagrancy, then you're leased out because you can't afford the crazy fines that they gave you. So your old slave owner, you're free now. You're a black person that's free, 13th Amendment. You're a citizen, 14th Amendment. But because you're a so-called vagrant, then you're forced to work again on the old plantation that you once were freed from. This is why black people say reparations, okay? If we still voicing reparations, we're still not equal to this day, okay? You can't go through that and think that you could catch up. There's an illusion of equality, economic equality, but the reality is generational wealth is still less than our white citizens to this day. Let's go on. The present-day value of 40 acres and a mule can provide the foundation for the calculation of the magnitude of reparation owed to black Americans. 3 objectives can be ascribed to a program of reparation: acknowledgement, redress, and closure. Okay, this is what this book I'm reading here that I got that from. Okay, it's a book that shows that, look how thick it is. These you might have seen them in that video clip, From Here to Equality. They did, many year research on how to deal with the reparation problem. The answer is here, From Here to Equality. I don't just say things without giving you sources of knowledge. Okay, this is a book that you should get if you want to answer the question about reparations. Okay, so let's go on to the next one. Okay, Sherman's radical plan for land redistribution in the South was actually a practical response to several issues. Although Sherman had never been a racial egalitarian, his land redistribution order served the military purpose of punishing Confederate planters along the right coast of the South for their role in starting the war, like I said, traitors, while simultaneously solving what he and radical Republicans view as a major new American problem: what to do with us, black folks, with a new class of free Southern laborers. Congressional leaders convinced President Lincoln to establish the Bureau of Refugee Freedmen and abandon land on March 3rd. I've talked about the March 3rd. This is after the special order came out in 1865. Okay, the Freedmen Bureau, as it came to be called, was authorized to give legal title for 40-acre plots of land to free blacks, okay, and some of the white Southern Unionists. But this was where showed that there were black people, a large portion of black people, who were given during that 400,000 square miles of black land. Okay, black people were in that area. I don't know where they put the Southern white unionists. I'm sure there was other lands that they gave, and most likely they gave it, and I'm sure they kept their land. We were reneged by the next administration under that racist Andrew Johnson, President Andrew Johnson. Let's go on to the next one. In 1860, pre-Civil War days, people of African descent only owned half of 1% of America's wealth, while 99.5% of America's wealth was owned by white Americans. You wonder why there's a generational gap, economic gap. Let's go on to the next one. In 1865, when the slavery ended, African Americans were free by law, but economically were socially engineered into a deliberately created underclass. That's what we talk about reparations. It was not something that had to do with our genes or our genetics or our working ability. It was deliberately done by the United States government. Look, Andrew Johnson, black codes, segregation, laws. Do you think that happened to white people? No, it happened to black people. Let's go on to the next one. Free without any economic compensation for the previous 246 years of free labor under extremely harsh conditions, which made us an economic underclass, even with the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment. Let's get that straight. Don't throw those amendments in our face saying that, well, we gave you those things and you should be all right. No, everything that was done to us was deliberately done to us, regardless of those laws. And we're still dealing with those to this day. Let's go on to the next one. Today, we are enjoying a social illusion of economic equality. We are playing basically a rigged game of Monopoly. Okay, let's go on to the next one. We've got a few seconds left. In Monopoly, at the beginning of everybody's supposed to get $1,500 in Monopoly money. But in 1865, we were free but given no economic compensation for our 246 years of labor. That equivalent of black people getting just $10 instead of the $1,500 Monopoly money and money to start the game. You can't win the economic game like that. We can't win it. And I'm gonna leave it at that. Look at that. You can't separate yourself from your history and be involved in the earning of wealth and development of power in this present moment. If you don't understand what were the tricks that were done, but those who call for reparations know that. I know that. Now you know that. So until next time, okay, I try to squeeze it as much as I can in just 30 minutes, but it's a lot. Chew on what I just taught you, okay? Until next time, peace, hotep, bye-bye.